On July 20th, 2020, an 18-year-old boy was found alive at the bottom of a steep parking lot in Gallatin, Tennessee. He had been trapped under his own truck. The truck had rolled down a hill and into a ditch. Paramedics arrived. They worked on him at the scene. They could not save him. He was pronounced dead a few hours later. He had just turned 18 1 month earlier. There was one witness. One. His father. According to the official account, the boy had been getting baseball gear out of the back of his pickup truck when the truck began to roll. The father was the only person who saw what happened. The father called 911. The
11825, code 6, 105 North Avenue, 52.
Father stayed at the top of the hill while his son lay dying at the bottom. The father told the dispatcher that 3 other men had come to help. None of those 3 men were ever identified. None of them ever came forward. The Gallatin Police Department closed the case. As an accident, there was no autopsy. There was no accident reconstruction. The truck, the alleged murder weapon, if it was one, was never impounded. It was returned to the father, who drove it for months before sending it to a salvage yard. When a family friend later located the truck at the scrap yard, it showed no visible damage consistent with rolling over a person. His name was Grant Solomon. He was a star pitcher at Grace Christian Academy. He was ranked the 90th top baseball prospect in Tennessee. He was being scouted by college programs, and recruiters were eyeing him for the draft. He had an 88-mile-per-hour fastball. He had future. He had everything ahead of him. And what his mother and his sister have spent the last 5 years saying to anyone who would listen, in petitions signed by hundreds of thousands of people, in vigils at the Tennessee State Capitol, in podcasts and news reports and attorney general hearings, is that the system did not look at the evidence in Grant's case. Not because the evidence was not there, because the system refused to look. Tonight is not about deciding who killed Grant Solomon. No one has been charged with killing Grant Solomon. The state of Tennessee has officially classified his death as a tragic accident, and unless and until that ruling is overturned, that is the legal status of this case. Tonight is about what the institutions in his case did not do, what they refused to examine, what evidence they declined to preserve, and what happens to a family that spends 4 years fighting a system that every step of the way made one decision: to look the other way. This is the Grant Solomon case. And tonight, we are walking through every checkpoint that failed him. Before we get into Grant's story, 3 things in the comments. The first is small. Tell me the city or town you are watching from. The second is also small. Tell me what time of day it is when you pressed play. The third is the one that matters. Tell me, in one sentence, whether you have ever fought a system that refused to listen to you, whether you have ever been the parent, the spouse, the sibling, the friend who walked into a police station or a district attorney's office and said, "Please look at this," to you, and walked out with the door closed. I read these. I see who is watching. And the rest of this video is going to ask you to think about exactly that question, but at scale, across the agencies, the offices, and the institutions that by their own published policies were supposed to look at Grant Solomon's death, and did not. The subscribe button is right under this video. We cover the cases where the institutional questions matter as much as the criminal ones. Now let's begin with the boy before the storm. Grant Adler Solomon was born on June 13th, 2002. He grew up in Franklin, Tennessee, the kind of town where a kid with a baseball arm can become a local story before he even hits high school. He had an older sister named Gracie. His parents were Aaron and Angelia Solomon, known as Angie. Aaron, at the time of Grant's birth, was a news anchor at WSMV Channel 4 in Nashville, a recognizable face, a local broadcaster, a man whose voice the viewers of Central Tennessee knew from the evening news. Angie was Grant's primary caretaker. By the time Grant was a teenager, his parents had separated. The divorce was finalized in 2013. By the time Grant entered his senior year, the children were living primarily with their mother. Aaron had left television and reinvented himself as a financial planner. taking a position with Merrill Lynch in Tennessee, working in wealth management. But the part of Grant's life that mattered most, by every account from teachers, coaches, teammates, and family, was baseball. He was a right-handed pitcher. By his senior year, he was throwing fastballs that consistently registered at 88 miles per hour. Perfect Score, a baseball scouting agency that ranks high school prospects in every state, ranked Grant as the 90th top baseball prospect in Tennessee. They gave him a 7 out of 10 rating, which in their grading system meant, and I'm quoting their published rubric, quote, college prospect and possible future draft pick with further development. Translation. Grant Solomon at 18 years old was a kid the scouts were watching, a kid the colleges were calling, a kid whose father, by his own statements at the time, was envisioning would go to an Ivy League school on a baseball scholarship. A kid who, by every metric the sport uses to measure potential, was on a trajectory most American teenagers can only dream about. He attended Grace Christian Academy in Franklin, a private Christian school where he was a senior. He had friends, he had a girlfriend, he was, by every available account from people who knew him then, the kind of 17 and 18-year-old you would want your own child to spend time with. Polite, funny, driven, faithful. He went to church, he prayed before games, he thanked God in his social media posts when his fastball broke 90. He was, and I'm using the word the people who loved him use about him still, a good kid. There is video footage of Grant. It is publicly available. You can see him pitching. You can see him at school events. You can see him at family gatherings. You can see him holding his sister's shoulder and laughing at something off camera. You can see him standing in his graduation robe with the look on his face that every parent of a senior knows. The look of a kid who is about to leave. In June of 2020, 1 month before he died, Grant turned 18. He graduated from Grace Christian Academy. Plans were being made for the next stage. College applications had been submitted. A baseball clinic in Gallatin, about 50 miles north of Franklin near the Kentucky border, was on the schedule for July. The clinic was called the Ward Performance Institute, or WPI, run by a former professional player named Ward. The appointment at WPI was scheduled for the morning of July 20th, 2020. It was an exclusive, costly private session. According to multiple accounts from people who knew the family, the father, Aaron Solomon, had arranged the appointment. The father had what witnesses described as big dreams for his son, by possibly even an Ivy League school, possibly even a draft pick. The clinic was supposed to be one of the next stepping stones. Now here's what is important to understand about that morning. July 20th, 2020, was the first time in approximately 2 years that Aaron Solomon had been alone with Grant for an extended period. The children had been living with their mother since the divorce. Aaron's contact with Grant had been limited, structured, supervised in some periods. The trip to WP1, 50 miles from home, just the father and son, no other family members present, was, by every account, an unusual scheduling. Grant drove his own truck, a white Toyota pickup. He met his father in the WPI parking lot on the morning of July 20th. Aaron arrived first and was waiting when Grant pulled in. What happened in the next several minutes is the heart of this case. It is also, depending on which account you read, either a tragic accident, or one of the most uninvestigated, suspicious deaths of a teenager in the state of Tennessee in the last decade. Tonight we are walking through what we know happened and what we know did not happen in the order in which it occurred. Stay with me. The morning of July 20th, 2020 was a Monday. The temperature in Gallatin that day climbed into the high 80s. Grant left Franklin in his white Toyota pickup. He drove the 50 miles north to WPI. He arrived in the parking lot at approximately 8 in the morning. The Ward Performance Institute is, geographically, a modest facility. The lot itself slopes downward from the main entrance toward a grassy ditch on the east side. The grade is not gentle. Anyone who has seen photographs of the lot, and the photographs are part of the publicly available case material, will note that a vehicle parked at the top of the slope, with its brake disengaged, would roll. That is a fact of physics. That is not in dispute. What is in dispute is everything that happened next. According to the official version, as recorded in the Gallatin Police Department's report, and as told by Aaron Solomon to investigators at the scene, Grant parked his truck at the top of the slope. He got out. He walked to the back of the truck. He opened the tailgate. He began retrieving his baseball gear from the truck bed. And then, at some point in the next few seconds, by the father's own account, the truck began to roll. Aaron, standing nearby, looked away. When he looked back, the truck was rolling down the slope with Grant beneath it. The truck rolled approximately 40 to 50 feet down the asphalt grade. It came to a stop in the ditch. Grant was trapped underneath. That is the official account. That is what the Gallatin Police Department wrote down. That is what the Sumner County District Attorney's Office accepted. That is the version signed and stamped that closed the case. And here is what the family, Angie and Gracie Solomon, joined eventually by independent journalists, podcasters, forensic consultants, and over 255,000 petition signatories, say is wrong with that version. First, a pickup truck, parked on a slope, does not begin to roll unless the parking brake is disengaged, the transmission is in neutral, and the brake pedal is not depressed. Aaron's account requires all three of those conditions to have been simultaneously true at the precise moment Grant was at the rear of the vehicle. The truck was operating normally on the drive from Franklin to Gallatin. There has been no documentation of any prior mechanical failure of the parking brake or transmission. The family has asked on the record since 2020, and why was the truck in neutral with the parking brake disengaged while it sat on a steep slope with a teenager standing behind it? Second, Grant was found beneath the truck, not behind it, beneath it. The geometry of how a person standing at the rear of a parked pickup ends up underneath that pickup when it rolls 40 feet downhill is not obvious. The family has consistently asked, what was the mechanism that took Grant from being at the tailgate to being under the chassis? Did the truck strike him? Did he fall and the truck rolled over him? Did he attempt to stop the truck and become caught beneath it? The Gallatin Police Department, in their closed file, did not perform an accident reconstruction. The biomechanics of the alleged accident have never been forensically modeled. The question has never been answered. Third, Grant was wearing baseball training goggles that morning, according to family members who saw him before he left for WPI. When paramedics arrived at the scene, those goggles were not on his face. They were not in the truck cab. They were not, according to the initial paramedic accounts, anywhere near the body. Fourth, Grant was wearing a baseball cap. The cap was eventually found in the ditch, separate from his body. The cap had blood on it. But the cap did not show signs of having been run over by a vehicle. No tire marks, no crush damage, no asphalt embedding. A cap that was on a person's head when a truck rolled over them would, by basic physics, show some of those marks. Grant's cap did not. Fifth, Grant's phone. His phone was in the ditch with him. But the phone's activity log, according to subsequent independent review by people in the family's circle, showed that the phone moved at certain times after the moment of death in ways that no investigator has publicly explained. The Gallatin Police Department did not forensically image Grant's phone. The data on it was never preserved as evidence in a criminal investigation because it was never opened as a criminal investigation. Hold those 5 items: the truck's mechanical status, the biomechanics, the missing goggles, the cap without tire marks, the phone with unexplained post-mortem activity. None of these 5 items is by itself conclusive of anything. Any one of them could have an innocent explanation. But every one of them, every single one, required investigation to determine that innocent explanation. And in Grant Solomon's case, none of them were investigated. Not separately, not together. The official record contains no analysis of any of them. The case was closed before the questions were asked. At approximately 8:23 in the morning on July 20th, Aaron Solomon called 911. The audio of that call is, in pieces, publicly available. It has been reported on by multiple journalists. It has been analyzed by podcasters. It has been parsed, sentence by sentence, by the family and their supporters for 5 years now. And there are 3 things in that call that more than anything else drove the family's belief that something in the official story did not add up. First, the phrasing. At one point in the call, Aaron tells the dispatcher, quote, "What I think caused the accident." Lauren Conlon, a true crime journalist who covered this case from her platform Pop Crime, noted in her podcast that the phrase "what I think caused," coming from the only witness to an event, is unusual. A witness who actually saw what happened typically describes what happened, not what they think happened. The conditional language was in Conlon's analysis a tell. Second, the 3 men. During the call, Aaron tells the dispatcher that 3 other men were down at the truck, helping Grant. The dispatcher working from this information treats the scene as one with multiple bystanders present. The dispatcher tells Aaron to go down to the truck, to be with his son. Aaron does not go down. According to the call audio and subsequent witness accounts, Aaron remained at the top of the slope for the duration of the call. Third, and this is the one that, in retrospect, may be the most consequential single fact about this entire case. Those 3 men have never been identified. Not by the Gallatin Police Department, not by the Sumner County District Attorney's Office, not by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, not by any subsequent independent inquiry. None of those 3 men ever came forward to give a statement to police. None of them ever appeared in any subsequent court proceeding. None of them, to the best public knowledge, exists in any verifiable record. Now think about what that means. The official narrative of Grant Solomon's death includes 3 named bystanders who were allegedly present at the scene. The official narrative says those 3 men were helping Grant, were near him, were with him, were witnesses to the position of his body, to the state of the truck, to the moments after the alleged accident. And 5 years later, none of those 3 men can be identified. They are, in the language of investigative reporting, ghost witnesses. People who appear in a witness account but cannot be located, named, or interviewed. In a properly investigated death, the existence of 3 uncorroborated bystander witnesses would be a major lead. Police would canvass the area. Police would pull surveillance footage from any nearby business with cameras. Police would issue public calls for any of the 3 to come forward and provide their accounts. Police would, in the standard procedural manner, treat the absence of 3 named witnesses as a question that needed to be answered before the case could be closed. In Grant Solomon's case, none of that happened. The 3 men were mentioned in the 911 call. They were not mentioned again in any official document, ever. The case was closed without their identities being established. The case was closed without their existence ever being independently verified. I want to slow down here, because this section is the structural heart of this entire documentary. This is the section that, more than any other, explains why the family of Grant Solomon has spent the last 5 years fighting. The Gallatin Police Department investigated the death of Grant Solomon and closed the case as an accident. The Sumner County District Attorney's Office, headed by Ray Whitley, reviewed that closure and concurred. The Tennessee Attorney General's Office, at a hearing in August of 2022, declined to intervene. The official position of the state of Tennessee is that Grant Solomon died in a tragic accident on July 20th, 2020. But the family's argument has never been about overturning that official finding through speculation. Their argument has been narrower, more specific, and far harder for the system to dismiss. Their argument is this: the investigation that led to that finding did not investigate. 6 specific things were not done. And until those 6 specific things are done, the official finding cannot be said to have been earned. It can only be said to have been declared. Here are the 6 things. Number 1, there was no autopsy. An 18-year-old previously healthy male, found dead under his own vehicle, with conflicting accounts of how that vehicle came to be on top of him, did not receive an autopsy. The cause of death was recorded as accidental crush injury. The mechanism was assumed. It was not confirmed by a medical examiner. And here is what makes this fact even more striking. At the time of his death, Grant Solomon had tested positive for COVID-19. The disease had been confirmed by a recent test. COVID, particularly in the early waves of 2020, was associated with sudden cardiac complications, with unexplained collapses, with a range of medical conditions that could have caused or contributed to his death entirely independent of the truck. An autopsy could have established whether Grant Solomon was already dead or dying before the truck rolled. An autopsy could have established whether his injuries were consistent with being struck by a rolling vehicle or with another mechanism entirely. Without an autopsy, the cause and manner of death are, in a strict forensic sense, unestablished. The truck is assumed. The truck has never been confirmed. The truck has never been. Number 2, there was no accident reconstruction. In any traffic fatality, the standard procedure is for trained accident reconstructionists to document the scene, measure the slope, calculate the vehicle's likely speed at the point of impact, model the trajectory, and produce a technical report that explains in physical terms what happened. This is standard. This is what happens for a fatal car crash on a public road. In Grant Solomon's case, a fatal incident involving a vehicle on private property with a single uncorroborated witness, no accident reconstruction was performed. The biomechanics of Grant's injuries were never modeled. The vehicle's trajectory was never calculated. The slope's role in the alleged rollover was never quantified. The investigation accepted the witness account at face value and stopped there. Number 3, the truck was never impounded. Number 3, the truck was never impounded. In a standard fatal vehicle incident, particularly one with any unusual circumstances, the vehicle is impounded by police as evidence. It is held in a secured lot. It is subject to forensic examination. The mechanical state of the parking brake, the transmission, the brake pedal, the steering, the tires, all of these are documented before any party touches the vehicle again. In Grant Solomon's case, the truck was not impounded. It was returned to the family. Aaron Solomon, the only witness to the alleged accident and the registered owner of the vehicle, took possession of the truck and continued driving it for months afterward. In February of 2021, approximately 7 months after Grant's death, a family friend of Angie Solomon's located that truck at a salvage yard. Photographs were taken. The truck, according to those photographs, showed no major damage consistent with rolling 40 feet down a hill and crushing a person to death. The frame was intact. The undercarriage was not visibly compromised. The truck had been described by Aaron to the family as having been totaled in the accident, but the salvage yard truck did not appear, by visual inspection, to be totaled. This is the part where, in any other investigation, the police department would have impounded the truck immediately upon learning of its location. The truck is the alleged murder weapon. The truck is the evidence. The state of the parking brake, if functional, would be exculpatory for the father's account, or, if non-functional, would be corroborative. The Gallatin Police Department, on learning that the truck had been located, did not impound it. It went to scrap. The evidence is gone. Number 4. Grant's phone was never forensically imaged. Modern smartphones contain an extraordinary archive of evidence, location data, activity logs, health app records that can indicate, sometimes to the minute, when someone stopped moving. Text messages, voice memos, photographs, calendar entries. In a death of any complexity, the victim's phone is, in a modern forensic protocol, one of the first items to be preserved and imaged. In Grant Solomon's case, the phone was not imaged by police. Independent observers in the family's circle have noted unexplained post-mortem movements of the phone. None of those movements have been officially investigated. Number 5. The 3 witnesses named on the 911 call were never identified. We discussed this in the previous section. I am repeating it here because in the context of all 6 failures together, It deserves a numbered place on the list. The Gallatin Police Department did not canvass for the three men, did not pull surveillance footage from the area to attempt to identify them, did not issue any public call for the three to come forward. 5 years later, none of them are identifiable. The official record of who is at the scene of Grant's death includes 3 people who, in any forensic sense, do not exist. Number 6. The decision not to escalate the case to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The TBI exists to assist local law enforcement with complex investigations, particularly ones where local resources are limited or where conflicts of interest may exist. In a case involving a death with a single witness, a parent witness, a witness with an existing custody and divorce history with the surviving parent, many police departments would request TBI involvement as a matter of standard practice. The Gallatin Police Department did not request TBI involvement. The case was closed at the local level by the local department with no outside review. 6 things. 6 specific, named, documentable procedural failures. Not theories, not speculation, not the family's interpretation of motive. Just 6 items of standard investigative practice that, in Grant Solomon's case, were not performed. The investigation was, in the most literal sense, an investigation that did not investigate. And the family, the mother and the sister of an 18-year-old boy, have spent the last 5 years asking of every institution they can reach why those 6 things were not done. They have not, in 5 years, received an answer. Grant's funeral was held at Grace Christian Academy, the school he had just graduated from. The service was attended by classmates, teammates, coaches, family friends, and members of the Franklin community. By all accounts of those who were present, it was a typical funeral for a young person taken too soon. Grief, shock, prayers, hymns. Aaron Solomon delivered a eulogy. And in that eulogy, he told a story that would, in the years afterward, become one of the most cited pieces of evidence in the family's ongoing effort to get the case reopened. The story has been called, by people in the family circle who know it well, the Grantley Miracle. As recounted by Aaron in the eulogy, the story is this. After Grant's death, a man, described as a stranger or acquaintance of the family, was driving past the WPI parking lot. He stopped. He walked into the ditch where Grant had died, and there, in the ditch, he found 3 items that had belonged to Grant: his cap, his cell phone, and his goggles. The same 3 items that, by the family's accounting, had been mysteriously absent or unaccounted for from the original scene investigation. The man retrieved them. He returned them to Aaron, and, according to Aaron's eulogy, the experience of finding these items in the ditch caused this man to have a spiritual awakening, to find his faith, to, in Aaron's phrasing, become saved. Aaron called this the Grantley Miracle, a miracle named after his son, in which the recovery of evidence from the death scene became the catalyst for another person's religious conversion. I am going to handle this very carefully because the funeral was a deeply personal moment for a grieving family, and because Aaron Solomon is presumed innocent of any wrongdoing and has never been charged with any crime in connection with Grant's death. But the structural problem with the Grantley Miracle story, from a pure investigative standpoint, separate from anyone's motives, is this. The items recovered by this unidentified man are the same items that should have been documented at the original scene by responding officers. The cap, the phone, the goggles. These are precisely the items the family has cited for years as evidence that the scene was not properly processed. And the man who allegedly found them, like the 3 men named on the 911 call, has never, to public knowledge, been independently identified. He is another ghost witness in a case full of them. Whatever Aaron's intent in telling the eulogy story, the structural fact remains. Items that should have been preserved as evidence were not preserved by the police. They were instead, according to the eulogy account, recovered by an unidentified third party, and then returned to the only witness of the alleged accident. Whether or not the story is true is, in some senses, beside the point. What matters investigatively is that those items, which should have been logged, photographed, bagged, and entered into evidence by responding officers on July 20th, were instead handled at some point in the days or weeks after Grant's death by people who were not police officers. The chain of custody, in the language of forensic investigation, was not maintained. It was not maintained because no one in authority treated the items as evidence in the first place. They were not evidence. They were the personal effects of a tragic accident victim returned to his father. End of story. That is what happens when an institution decides at the outset that a death is not a crime. Everything that follows the chain of custody, the evidence preservation, the witness identification, the forensic analysis, is calibrated to the assumption that there is nothing to investigate. By the time the family began to ask whether there might have been something to investigate, the evidence was no longer in any state to support an investigation. In the weeks and months after Grant's funeral, Angie Solomon, Grant's mother, began doing what mothers in this position do. She read the police report. She asked questions. She tried to schedule meetings with the Gallatin Police Department. She tried to speak with the Sumner County District Attorney's Office. She tried to understand why the 6 things had not been done. She did not, in those early months, claim that anyone had killed her son. She claimed only that the investigation had been inadequate, that an 18-year-old's death deserved an autopsy, that the truck deserved an impoundment, that the 3 men on the 911 call deserved to be identified, that these things should be done, could still be done, would if the system would simply act, restore some measure of accountability to a death that had been processed too quickly. The system did not act. In November of 2021, 16 months after Grant's death, Angie organized a protest at the Tennessee State Capitol in Nashville. Supporters gathered. Signs were held. The press was invited. The Gallatin Police Department was called upon publicly to reinvestigate the case. The department's response, then and since, has been that the investigation is closed and that the matter is not, in their characterization, a criminal one. In March of 2022, Angie's daughter Gracie, then 16 years old, 2 years younger than Grant, came forward publicly with separate allegations against Aaron Solomon. She alleged in detail that her father had sexually abused her when she was a child. Those allegations were investigated by Williamson County authorities and, according to subsequent court documents, were determined to be, quote, unfounded. Aaron Solomon denied the allegations. He has consistently and on the record denied them. He has never been charged in connection with them. The unfounded ruling in the family's interpretation was another instance of a system declining to look at evidence. But the legal status of that ruling is unambiguous. The Williamson County courts examined the allegations and did not find them substantiated. That is the legal record. I am reporting it as such. Also in March of 2022, Aaron Solomon filed a civil lawsuit against Angie. The lawsuit alleged that the public claims Angie had been making about him, including the abuse allegations and the allegations about Grant's death, were false, defamatory, and constituted what Aaron's filing called a recklessly carried out smear campaign on social media. The lawsuit is part of the public record. Aaron's denial of all wrongdoing is part of the public record. In August of 2022, the case reached the office of the Tennessee Attorney General. Jonathan Skrmetti, then the Tennessee Attorney General, previously the Chief Legal Counsel to Governor Bill Lee, convened a hearing on the matter. Skrmetti's office reviewed the existing case file. He stated on the record that the Sumner County District Attorney's Office had visited what he termed the crime scene and had investigated the case. He stated that the office didn't find reason to move forward with the investigation. That was the highest legal authority in the state of Tennessee, ruling on Angie Solomon's request. The answer was no. Angie did not stop. She launched a Change.org petition asking the Gallatin Police Department, the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the District Attorney's Office to reopen the case. As of the most recent count, The petition has collected over 255,000 signatures. A GoFundMe, organized to support, quote, lawyers, private investigators, forensic accountants, and more, collected over $84,000. In May of 2023, supporters gathered for a candlelight vigil at Public Square Park in Nashville. Hundreds attended. The chants of justice for Grant were heard across the park. Angie spoke to the crowd. She said, and I am quoting her exact words, quote, "There are people fighting us on finding out or even asking questions about what happened to Grant. It makes zero sense, but it makes every bit of sense." The press picked up the case in waves. Investigation Discovery covered it. The Tennessean wrote about it. Lauren Conlin at Pop Crime devoted multi-episode podcast arcs to it. Luna Shark Media, the production company behind several major true crime podcasts, began following the family's effort. Mandy Matney, the journalist who broke the Murdaugh murder story, spoke about the Solomon case on her platforms. By 2024, the Grant Solomon case was, in the true crime community, one of the most discussed cases of institutional failure in the country. And still, the Gallatin Police Department's official position did not change. The Sumner County District Attorney's official position did not change. The Tennessee Attorney General's office did not reopen the matter. 5 years passed. The system held its line. Here's the structural question this case raises, separate from anything about who did or did not do what to Grant Solomon. Why does a system designed to investigate suspicious deaths sometimes decline to investigate? What are the institutional incentives, not the criminal ones, the bureaucratic ones, that cause a death like Grant's to be closed before the questions are asked? The answer, in the academic literature on this question, is what is sometimes called the path of least resistance in case classification. When a small-town police department receives a call about a death, they have to make an early decision. Is this a criminal matter or not? That decision determines how many resources the case consumes for the next several months. A criminal classification triggers the activation of forensic teams, evidence handling protocols, district attorney involvement, possible bureau referral, public records sensitivity, and, most consequentially, the institutional commitment to actually solve the case before closing it. An accident classification triggers none of those things. The case is processed, the family is notified, the paperwork is filed, the case is closed. Same day, often, sometimes within hours. The choice between those two classifications is, at the moment it is made, sometimes a function of evidence, but often a function of the witness's account. If the only witness gives a clean accident narrative, and that narrative is internally consistent on its face, the path of least resistance is to accept it. Open the file, close the file. Move to the next case. That is what happened in Gallatin on July 20th, 2020. The only witness gave an accident narrative. The narrative was internally consistent on its face. The Gallatin Police Department accepted it. The case was opened and closed in the same procedural breath. The 6 things that, in a criminal classification, would have been mandatory were not done. Because by the time the question of whether they should have been done was raised, the case was already closed. And reopening a closed case requires the bureaucracy that closed it to admit, retroactively, that it should not have been closed. Bureaucracies, as a rule, do not enjoy admitting that. This is the institutional trauma at the heart of the Grant Solomon case. It is not, fundamentally, the trauma of any one investigator making a bad decision. It is the trauma of an entire system that, by its standard operating procedure, makes a snap decision about every death it encounters, and then defends that snap decision against all subsequent challenges. Not because the system believes it is right, but because admitting it is wrong would require a redesign of the procedure itself. Angie Solomon, in her 4-year fight, has been doing something more ambitious than asking for justice for her son. She has been asking the state of Tennessee to redesign the procedure, to create a mechanism by which a closed case can be meaningfully reopened when new questions emerge, to create accountability for the decisions that close cases prematurely, to create a path by which a family that has spent 4 years documenting 6 specific procedural failures, can have those failures officially examined. That is not a request the system is built to fulfill. And the family has been fighting against the architecture of the system itself, not just against the specific officers in Gallatin who made the original decision. Every avenue Angie has pursued, police department appeals, district attorney conferences, attorney general hearings, has run into the same wall. The system is designed to defend its own prior decisions. It is not designed to revisit them at the request of a grieving mother. And that brings us finally to what happened on April 11th, 2025. The development that, by every account, was the breaking point of the 4-year battle. The development that I'm going to handle now with extreme care because it is an active criminal matter with a presumption of innocence. On April 11th, 2025, Angie Solomon was arrested by the Franklin, Tennessee Police Department. She was charged with felony solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The allegation is that over the course of a 45-minute recorded conversation, she attempted to hire a man named Sean Atkins to kill her ex-husband, Aaron Solomon. Sean Atkins, according to the arrest affidavit, was not a hitman. He was an undercover agent with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The arrangement, according to investigators, was set in motion by what the affidavit calls a concerned citizen, a person who had been told by Angie about her intent and who had alerted police. The 45-minute conversation was recorded. The Tennessean obtained the recording through a public records request. Angie was arrested as she exited the vehicle where the conversation had taken place. She was charged with felony first-degree murder solicitation. Her initial bond was set at $500,000. A Williamson County judge subsequently reduced the bond to $250,000. As of the most recent reporting available, she remained in custody. I want to say what I'm going to say next very carefully. Angie Solomon has been charged with this offense. She has not been convicted of it. She is presumed innocent. The legal process will run its course. A jury will, at some future date, decide what they believe the recording establishes and whether the elements of the offense have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the legal process. I am not predicting its outcome. I am not editorializing about it. I am reporting that the charge has been filed. What I am also reporting is what the existence of this charge represents, separate from whether the charge will ultimately be proven. It represents the apparent breaking point of a 4-year battle, a battle in which a mother who believed her son had been killed, who could not get a single institution in the state of Tennessee to look at the 6 things she said were not done, who watched the petition climb to 255,000 signatures, who watched the vigils, who watched the press, who watched the attorney general, who watched the district attorney, who watched all of it pass and the system not move. Apparently, by the prosecution's account, attempted to take matters into her own hands. Whether she did or did not is for a jury to decide. What is undeniable is the context in which the charge was filed. A 4-year-old unanswered case. A system that, by every public action, had communicated that it was not going to revisit its prior decision. A family that had exhausted, by April of 2025, every legal and procedural avenue available to them. And here is the part that is the hardest to say. Because both things can be true at the same time. The justice system's failure to investigate Grant Solomon's death is not justified by anything Angie may or may not have allegedly done in April of 2025. And anything Angie may or may not have allegedly done in April of 2025 is not justified by the justice system's failure to investigate Grant Solomon's death. The two events exist together. They are causally related. They are not morally interchangeable. If Angie Solomon is convicted of solicitation to commit murder, that conviction does not in any way exonerate the system that did not look at Grant's case. If Angie Solomon is acquitted, that acquittal does not vindicate the system either. The system's failure to investigate Grant Solomon's death is its own fact, separately documentable, separately accountable, and separately demanding of answers. Whatever happens to his mother in the courtroom this year, That is the part the cable news framing has mostly gotten wrong about this case. The April 2025 charge is being covered in some outlets as the headline. The 4-year battle is being covered as the backstory. The framing should be reversed. The 4-year battle is the case. The April 2025 charge is, tragically, the consequence of the 4-year battle going unheard. Let me try to land this because there is a lot of weight in this case and a lot of unresolved threads. And the easy thing to do at the end of a video like this would be to demand that the case be reopened. But the honest thing to do is harder. The Grant Solomon case may never be reopened. The Gallatin Police Department may never impound a truck that no longer exists. The Sumner County District Attorney may never order an autopsy of a body that has been in the ground for 5 years. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation may never identify 3 men who appeared in a 911 call and then vanished into the structural mist of an under-investigated death scene. The system that closed this case in the first place may, for the foreseeable future, hold its line, but none of that changes what the case has already accomplished. The Grant Solomon case has, over the last 5 years, become one of the most thoroughly publicly documented examples of institutional failure in a teenage death investigation in the United States. The 6 things that were not done are now part of the public record. The procedural architecture that allowed those 6 things to remain undone is now part of the public conversation. The next time a small-town police department in Tennessee, or anywhere else in America, closes a death case in the same procedural breath in which it opens it, there is now a roadmap written by Grant's family for what should have been done instead. That is not justice. The family does not call it justice. They have never called it justice. They have called it and continue to call it the bare minimum. The bare minimum was never delivered for Grant Solomon. The fact that the bare minimum is now publicly named, that in 5 years of work has become the family's accomplishment. Grant Adler Solomon was born on June 13th, 2002. He died on July 20th, 2020. He was a son, he was a brother, he was a teammate, he was a friend, he was a senior at Grace Christian Academy. He was the 90th ranked baseball prospect in Tennessee. He was, by every account from people who knew him, a good kid. He had future. He had every reason to believe his life was just beginning. The system did not preserve the evidence that would have answered the questions about how his life ended. The system did not perform the autopsy that would have established the cause. The system did not reconstruct the accident that would have established the mechanism. The system did not impound the truck that would have established the conditions. The system did not identify the witnesses that would have established the scene. The system did not refer the case to the agency with the resources to do all of those things. The system, by its own admission in every subsequent inquiry, did not find sufficient reason to do these things. Whether sufficient reason existed is, in some senses, a question the system itself never asked. It asked only whether sufficient reason had been presented to it. And the answer to that question was no, because the only person presenting evidence at the time of the closure was the witness whose account the closure was based on. The family has spent 5 years presenting the other side of that record. The version that asks the questions the system did not ask. The version that documents the things the system did not document. The version that, in 5 years, and in 255,000 signatures, and in a vigil at Public Square Park, and in a hearing at the Tennessee Attorney General's office, and in podcasts and articles, and now, for whatever the legal process determines about that, a felony solicitation charge against a grieving mother has been the loudest voice in the public record about what happened on the morning of July 20th, 2020. Whatever you believe about who is responsible for Grant Solomon's death, the question this case asks is not, in the end, about that. The question this case asks is whether a system designed to investigate suspicious deaths can be made to investigate them when the only person at the scene asks it not to. Whether a small-town police department in any town in America, faced with a single witness account of a teenager's death, will perform the standard procedural checks that distinguish an investigated death from a closed one. Whether a family that says we have questions please look will. In this country, be heard. The answer in Tennessee in Grant Solomon's case, for the last 5 years, has been no. The conversation this video is asking you to have with everyone you share it with is whether that answer is acceptable. If this video meant something to you tonight, do 3 things. Subscribe, because we cover the cases where the institutional questions matter as much as the criminal ones, and we will follow Grant Solomon's case wherever it goes from here. Comment which of the 6 procedural failures, in your view, was the most consequential. The missing autopsy, the missing reconstruction, the unimpounded truck, the unimaged phone, the unidentified witnesses, or the absence of TBI referral. Tell me what you think the state of Tennessee should do about it now. And share this video with one person, anyone, who works in law enforcement, in prosecution, in forensic medicine, or in legislative oversight. They are the people who, in the next case, can decide whether the bare minimum is delivered or whether another family will be forced to spend the next 5 years asking why it wasn't. Grant deserved every adult in his life to have looked at him at 18 and said, "This young man's death deserves an investigation." The adults who declined to do that are not today any one specific institution. They are the architecture of the system itself, and the architecture can be changed. But only when enough of us in enough places decide that it has to be.